We're about to look at a video where I interview philosopher Christina van Dijk, who is our representative for the virtue theoretical tradition, the tradition of thinking about ethics in terms of virtues and vices. This is a tradition that's often associated with the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle, also very much the dominant position throughout many of the medieval ages, the Middle Ages. Virtue theory is complicated. Like all of these ethical theories, we won't be able to discuss it in great detail, but one important feature to notice is that Aristotle will say that oftentimes the virtuous thing to do, or the thing that characterizes the virtuous person, will be the mean between two extremes. So the action that is the medium or the mean, the halfway point, if you want, between two more extreme kinds of actions. So for example, if you think about courage or bravery, which is supposed to be one of the great virtues in the Greek tradition, a hero is courageous by way of not being extreme in the vice of cowardice, that is, failing to confront possible harms or challenges in the right kind of way, and so being a coward. But the hero is also not overly, quixotically reckless, doesn't just take on any challenge that comes his or her way and assume that he can defeat it. And so the point is, and that's sort of an easy example, but the point is sometimes virtue comes right in the middle between two extremes of vice, the vice of excess and the vice of deficiency. Van Dijk says that she agrees with this picture, and she also agrees that what the mean is for an individual agent can often differ given their circumstances and their background understanding of themselves, their own history. So she says, I believe Aristotle was correct. This is from the paper that we asked you to take a look at. I believe Aristotle was correct in identifying virtue as a mean between two extremes, and that he was right in claiming that human beings do not share a common mean, but rather that where the mean falls for each person will be relative to us. In other words, what's virtuous for an individual person will depend and vary on their particular external circumstances, physical abilities, and limitations, etc. What's more, this mean can and will change as the person's circumstances change. So she endorses the mean theory of virtue and also endorses the thought that that can be a little bit more relative than some of the other theories that we've looked at, where if you take the divine command theory, you just have God telling you to do something in a certain context, and that's not really obviously taking into account your background situation and capabilities and so forth. The consequentialist, or the non-consequentialist, tends to generate principles based on the most pleasure for the most people in the consequentialist case, or whatever the basis for the principle is in the non-consequentialist case, that's supposed to be sort of a one-size-fits-all principle. No matter who you are, if insofar as you're rational and have moral standing, you should follow this non-consequentialist principle, or you should follow the principle that gives you the best for the most. And it's not so much taken into account your background, capabilities, and situation in the way that the virtue theory purports to do in any case. So one of the advantages is that this is supposed to respond to our kind of common sense thought that virtue or morality is situation and context relative in important ways, and that we take into account who we are and what we're capable of, and also what we know and so forth in thinking about what the right thing to do is. Obviously, some of these other theorists will have ways to defend against that kind of charge, so I don't want to say that they have nothing to say. That's supposed to be one advantage. Disadvantage, however, is that virtue theory seems less codifiable, less able to put into codes or principles that you can just spell out and say, here's the right thing to do for pretty much anybody in a given circumstance. Just follow this principle. Virtue theorist has to say something a bit more vague, like, well, look for the mean between all these different extremes, and it's not just cowardice, but all these other virtue and vice pairs, or triplets. And then also, these can't be really put into principles because the agent herself and her background capabilities have to be taken into account. The example that Van Dijk gives is, she would not be brave if she were to respond to an attacker in a dark alley by trying to fight them off. but somebody else, so she would be brave actually by running away and telling the authorities, trying to stop them in that way. But it wouldn't be brave for someone else who's a black belt in karate to do that. That person should just go ahead and take the attacker on and try to stop them from hurting both that person and other people as well. So the thought is you have to consider the circumstance, your own background, and all these other factors, to the point where sometimes virtue theorists will say, and Aristotle himself will say, actually we can't just figure it out from principles. The best thing to do is to just look at other people in our general area who seem to be virtuous, who have a kind of reliable history of choosing the mean between two extremes, and try to do basically what they do, or imagine what they would do in this situation, cultivate their habits, seek to become like them. Not really following a principle so much as following various examples. And that's thought to be, from a philosophical point of view, somewhat unsatisfying. So these are some of the pluses and minuses of virtue theory. We'll want to look at how Van Dyke considers some of them as we look at this interview.